In this section, I want to have a look at the question, what about hormones? Because some people might be wondering, well, that's all well and good what I've said so far about DNA and chromosomes and genes and so on, but what about hormones? Hormones are an important part of the endocrine system. The endocrine system is a system in your body composed of various organs known as glands, and these glands secrete hormones, and hormones can be thought of as chemical messages that travel through your bloodstream and target certain tissues and organs. Now, in the human body, there are over 50 different types of hormones, and they perform a variety of functions. For instance, insulin is a hormone that regulates blood sugar levels. Soon after you eat, your blood sugar level rises, so your pancreas, which is an endocrine organ, secretes insulin to help cope with this adjustment in blood sugar level. Now, in the case of type 1 diabetics, they have an impairment in their pancreas, so they have to inject themselves with insulin at appropriate times. Another example of a hormone is growth hormone. Now, as the name suggests, growth hormone is important for development, and it's particularly important during the adolescent growth spurt. However, when people mention what about hormones in the context of the current discussion, they're not usually referring to insulin or growth hormone or thyroid hormone. No, what they're referring to are sex hormones. And when we consider sex hormones, the two most important are testosterone for males and estrogen for females. So to get a better understanding of what these hormones are and what they do, I turn to the Endocrine Society website. Now, the Endocrine Society is a professional international medical organisation that, among other things, publishes research relating to the endocrine system. And so after a brief search on their website, these are the short, helpful definitions I came up for testosterone and estrogen. So first of all, for testosterone. Testosterone is the main sex hormone found in men. It controls male physical features. The testicles make testosterone. Women have testosterone too, but in much smaller amounts than in men. Now, isn't that interesting? Women do have some testosterone. Back to the quote. Testosterone helps bring on the physical changes that turn a boy into a man. This time of life is called puberty. Okay, so that's the definition for testosterone. Here's the one for estrogen. Estrogen are a group of hormones that play an important role in the sexual and reproductive development in women. Men have estrogen too, but in smaller amounts. Now, isn't that interesting? Men do have some estrogen. Back to the quote. And under the title it says, why is estrogen important? Estrogen helps bring about the physical changes that turn a girl into a woman. This time of life is called puberty. So from these two definitions, we learnt that testosterone helps bring about the changes that turn a boy into a man, and estrogen helps bring about the changes that turn a girl into a woman. Now, when they're referring to a man here, I'm presuming from context they're meaning an adult male, and when they say woman here, I'm presuming they mean an adult female. But what we learn from this quote is that these sex hormones are really important during puberty. But they are also really important much earlier in our life. In fact, they're really important during our embryonic development. To help explain this better, I want to introduce a famous Australian geneticist by the name of Jenny Graves. Now, not only is Jenny Graves a famous geneticist, she is also a specialist in this area. In 2017, she won the Prime Minister's Prize for Science for her pioneering investigations into the genetics of sex. And at the university where she resides, they have also named one of the buildings after her. So she is certainly quite a prominent researcher. And so recently I was listening to a lecture of hers. I was watching that and it's freely available on YouTube, where she was discussing some of the genetic differences between males and females. And near the start of the lecture, she gave a helpful description of early embryonic development. And so let's start off with what she says for males. The SRY gene is the one that makes a baby a boy. So what SRY does is it kickstarts other genes to make a testes in the embryo, and the embryonic testes makes male hormones, and it's those hormones that make the baby a boy. Now, when she says the embryonic testes makes male hormones, you need to think of androgens, male sex hormones. You need to be thinking of testosterone. You also need to be thinking of dihydrotestosterone, which is made from testosterone. But the point I want to make here is that testosterone is really important for male embryonic development. Okay, so that's the quote from Jenny Graves for male embryonic development. Let's look at the one she gave for female embryonic development. In the absence of SRY, now notice she starts it off by saying in the absence of SRY, which we learned in the previous episode is the common phrase used to refer to female development. Back to the quote. In the absence of SRY, other genes kick in to make an ovary. The ovary in the body makes female hormones now, and that makes the baby a girl. Now notice here, when she says that the ovary makes female hormones, you need to be thinking estrogen. So the point I'm making here is that during female embryonic development, estrogen is really important too. In fact, I think these two quotes from Jenny Graves are so helpful, I want to now juxtapose them against the pathway diagrams that I've recently shown you. So let's start off first of all with male development, where she says, the SRY gene is the one that makes a baby a boy. So what SRY does is it kickstarts other genes to make a testes in the embryo, and the embryonic testes makes male hormones, and it's those hormones that make the baby a boy. Okay, and now let's consider the female pathway. In the absence of SRY, other genes kick in to make an ovary. The ovary in the body makes female hormones now, and that makes the baby a girl. So you see, not only are sex hormones really important during puberty, they are also really important during our in utero development. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to modify these pathway diagrams, and a significant distance along the pathway I'm putting a sign labeled birth. And the reason that I'm doing that is to emphasize the point that by the time a baby is born, they have spent many months undergoing a process of sexual differentiation whereby genes and hormones are working together to bring about either male or female development. But the importance of sex hormones isn't just confined to puberty and in utero development either, because in the months following birth, babies also experience a brief surge in sex hormone levels, and this is sometimes referred to as mini-puberty. And this is how an important work in endocrinology describes mini-puberty. In infant boys, gonadotropins, now gonadotropins are hormones that stimulate the gonads, so they stimulate the testes in males and the ovaries in females. So in infant boys, gonadotropins and testosterone levels peak around 1 to 3 months of age and then decline to prepubertal levels by approximately 6 months of age. In girls, gonadotropin and estradiol levels, now estradiol is just one form of estrogen, so in girls, gonadotropin and estradiol levels rise and remain high until approximately 6 months. So we know that sex hormones are really important during our in utero development, but they are also really important in the months following birth also. But what I want to do now is I want to return to those statements I gleaned earlier from the Endocrine Society that relate to later childhood development. Remember, our two statements were these. Testosterone helps bring on the physical changes that turn a boy into a man, and estrogen helps bring about the physical changes that turn a girl into a woman. Now, in the confusing world that we live in, it seems that some people seem to be entertaining the question, are these two definitions interchangeable? What I mean by that is, can you switch the words boy and girl in these two sentences and they still make sense? So for instance, if you change the first sentence to read, testosterone helps bring on the physical changes that turn a girl into a man, Does that make sense? If you give a girl enough testosterone, does that make her into a man? Alternatively, if we change the second sentence to read as follows, estrogen helps bring about the physical changes that turn a boy into a woman. Does that make any sense? If you give a boy enough estrogen, does that turn him into a woman? Now, this is where we enter the world of masculinizing hormone therapy and feminizing hormone therapy in the context of cross-sex hormones. Masculinizing hormone therapy basically means giving someone lots of testosterone to enhance masculine features, and feminizing hormone therapy basically means giving someone lots of estrogen to enhance feminine features. Now, what I'm not referring to, though, is some of the genetic conditions that we've already encountered where people require extra sex hormones because they are deficient in them. So, for instance, women with Turner syndrome, 1X chromosome, they require extra estrogen. And males with Klinefelter syndrome, XXY, they require extra testosterone. But in these cases, it's basically giving them a hormone that they're a bit deficient in for their health and development. I tend to think it's a bit like giving a type 1 diabetic insulin. What I'm referring to here with masculinizing hormone therapy and feminizing hormone therapy is, for instance, with masculinizing hormone therapy, we're talking of individuals who've gone through standard female biological development, and then at some point in their life, for whatever reason, they decide to start taking lots of testosterone. And alternatively, for feminizing hormone therapy, I'm referring to individuals who've gone through standard male biological development, and then at some point in time, for whatever reason, they decide to start taking lots of estrogen. So let's look at some of the changes that can occur with the administration of these hormones. So first of all, let's look at masculinizing hormone therapy. So think of someone that's gone through female development. If they start taking lots of testosterone, these are some of the changes that they will start to notice. So first of all, there's a body fat redistribution. It's sort of towards the belly and away from the hips and thighs. They're likely to experience hair loss from the scalp. They're also likely to experience an increase in muscle mass and strength. Now, even though they lose hair from the top of their scalp, or they're likely to actually alternatively see an increase in facial hair and body hair. And also, they're likely to experience a deepening of the voice. Now, the time of onset for each of these changes will vary, and also the degree to which they are reversible if they stop taking that particular hormone. But there's some of the changes that you see in masculinizing hormone therapy. Let's now take a look at feminizing hormone therapy. So once again, in this instance here, think of someone who's gone through male biological development, and then they start taking lots of estrogen. These are the things they're likely to experience: a calmer mood, softer skin, body fat redistribution. Now, in this case, they're likely to experience more body fat on their hips and thighs as they take estrogen. They're likely to experience reduced muscle bulk and strength. They're likely to have a decrease in facial and body hair. And eventually, they are likely to experience breast growth. Now, once again, the time of onset for these changes will vary, and also the degree to which they are reversible if someone stops taking these particular hormones. So, and these lists I've shown you as well, they are not extensive. Like there's other details that you can fill in just by doing a simple online search to get an even more complete picture. But from what I've already shown you, it's clear that taking these hormones can enhance secondary sexual characteristics. So for instance, if I started taking lots of estrogen, I'd get softer skin and a body fat redistribution, and eventually I would develop breasts. But is changing secondary sexual characteristics the same as what we were asking before about those statements, whether they are interchangeable? Remember those two statements. Let's go back to them from the Endocrine Society, where we'd edited them to say testosterone helps bring on the physical changes that turn a girl into a man, and estrogen helps bring about the physical changes that turn a boy into a woman. Now, I would contend that both of these statements are logically untenable. And if I had to explain why these statements are logically untenable and therefore can't be true, I would say, well, from my perspective, there are at least 3 elephants in the room. Now, you might have heard of this expression before, there's an elephant in the room. It basically means there's some big conspicuous issue that people seem to be ignoring or pretending that isn't there. Well, in the case of what cross-sex hormones, what they can achieve, I believe there are at least 3 elephants in the room that we need to recognise. Even though estrogen can feminize the features of a boy, that doesn't mean it can turn him into a woman. Alternatively, even though testosterone can masculinize the features of a girl, that doesn't mean it can turn her into a man. Now, you might be thinking, well, there's a whole lot more than just 3 elephants, but these are the 3 elephants that loom largest in my mind. Elephant number 1 is that taking cross-sex hormones does not transform your sex chromosomes. What I mean by that is it doesn't matter how much estrogen I take, I'm still going to be walking around with 50 trillion copies of the Y chromosome. That wouldn't erase the Y chromosome in each of my cells and replace it with another X. If I took another Y chromosome test after taking lots of estrogen, I would still have a positive result, and the same result, in fact, being assigned to the same haplogroup, the same deep ancestral group. Alternatively, if each of my 4 sisters started taking lots of testosterone, that wouldn't erase one of the X chromosomes in each of their cells and replace it with a Y. If they undertook Y chromosome tests, it would still be a pointless exercise because there would be no Y chromosome to sequence. Now, admittedly, taking cross-sex hormones does affect gene expression, but it doesn't transform your sex chromosomes. It doesn't turn X chromosomes into Y chromosomes and vice versa. And that is elephant number 1. Elephant number 2 is that taking cross-sex hormones does not erase your prior development. We can't go back in time and change events in our life that have already occurred. As an extreme example, you obviously can't go back into your mother's womb 6 weeks post-conception and travel down a different developmental pathway. At this point in time, either the SRY gene was or wasn't expressed, and that key genetic event basically dictated whether you went down a male or female pathway of sexual differentiation. The physical body you possess today is the result of a developmental process that began in your mother's womb and continued to the present day. So as an example, if an individual develops a female body plan and a female phenotype and they start taking lots of testosterone, that's not going to transform functional female reproductive anatomy into functional male reproductive anatomy. Alternatively, if an individual develops a male phenotype and male body plan and they start taking estrogen, that's not going to transform functional male reproductive anatomy into functional female reproductive anatomy. Now, admittedly, the earlier in life an individual takes cross-sex hormones, there will be a bigger impact, but it doesn't erase your prior development. And that is elephant number 2. Elephant number 3 is that taking cross-sex hormones does not transform your gametes. Men make small gametes, sperm. Women make large gametes, eggs. If I take lots of estrogen, it's not going to transform my sperm into eggs. Alternatively, if a female takes lots of testosterone, it's not going to transform her eggs into sperm. Now, while on that point, not only are cross-sex hormones incapable of transforming your gametes into the other version, they are likely to harm the gametes that you already have. So, for instance, here's a quote from Hormones Australia, which is a part of the Endocrine Society of Australia, and they are discussing some of the precautions regarding taking masculinizing hormone therapy, and this is what they say. Before starting testosterone therapy, your doctor will discuss with you the option to have your eggs frozen, called oocyte cryopreservation. This is because the effect of testosterone on oocytes' eggs is unclear. Testosterone is a teratogen, meaning it can cause harm to unborn babies. So notice what the medical advice is for females who wish to undertake masculinizing hormone therapy in the form of testosterone, that medical advice is you need to seriously consider freezing your eggs. Okay, what about the alternative? What about males who wish to undertake feminizing hormone therapy? Well, here is a quote from the consent form from a medical clinic regarding feminizing hormone therapy. Infertility can occur very soon after starting estrogen and may be permanent. It is highly recommended to store sperm prior to starting estrogen. You may be quite sure you don't want to have biological children, but some people feel differently about this in the future. Freezing sperm before you start hormones gives you the option to access your sperm in the future if you want to have children. So notice the medical advice for males who wish to undergo feminizing hormone therapy. That medical advice is you need to seriously consider freezing your sperm. So let's recap our 3 elephants. Elephant number 1 was that taking cross-sex hormones does not transform your sex chromosomes. It doesn't turn X chromosomes into Y chromosomes or vice versa. Elephant number 2 was that taking cross-sex hormones does not erase the developmental pathway you have already progressed down. And elephant number 3 is that taking cross-sex hormones does not transform your gametes to the other version, and it's likely to harm the gametes that you already have. So in this section, we have seen how sex hormones are active at different points of development, and we've also seen some of the changes that can occur when people take cross-sex hormones. But in the next section, I want to take a closer look at some rare genetic exceptions that on first appearance might seem really confusing, but if we dig a bit deeper, we're in a much better position to understand what's going on.